Good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's hot topic and healthcare presentation, Design and Accessibility, Creating an Inclusive Experience for Everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
My name is Anastasia Sprumuli, and I'm the Director of Graduate Admissions here at Bay Path University. Tonight's presentation is the third and final in our three-part Design for Healthcare series. If you have missed either of the earlier sessions, recordings are available on the Bay Path University website under the Doctor of Health Science website in the news section. And before we begin, please note that today's session is being recorded. You may submit questions at any time using the question panel, and we'll reserve the time for discussion at the end of the presentation. For the best viewing experience, we do recommend keeping the presentation in full screen mode. And at this time, I'd like to turn things over to Amanda Clifford, our Doctor of Health Science graduate assistant, to introduce herself.
Hey guys, my name is Amanda. Thank you, Anastasia. I am the Doctor of Health Sciences graduate assistant for the 26-27 year. It's my first year in this, and I'm in a public health concentration. So I look forward to seeing all you guys. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Anastasia.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda. So it is my pleasure to introduce today's guest speaker, Elisa Watson. Elisa is an award-winning creative director with more than 20 years of experience in multimedia, marketing, and design. Her work spans healthcare, nonprofit, business-to-business, and consumer-focused organizations. A passionate and innovative collaborator, she specializes in developing and implementing effective cross-platform campaigns. Today, Elise will share practical insight into creating more inclusive and accessible experiences through thoughtful design. So please join me in welcoming Elisa Watson.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I'm excited to be with Baypath today to talk about accessibility and how design and accessibility really go hand in hand in creating inclusive experiences for everyone. If you have not been with me before, I know there's a delay. I need to wait. Okay. If you have not been with me before, you haven't seen the other two parts to this series, hi again. So I have a unique connection with healthcare, as earlier in my career, I spent 5 years with a large healthcare conglomerate, MedStar Health, with their corporate marketing department. And for the last 10 plus years, I've been working specifically with nonprofits. And I'm just under 3 years of having my own agency where we focus on nonprofits. And a lot of them are service nonprofits towards people. All right. All right. We're going to start with a question. Have you ever encountered a website, form, or document that was difficult or impossible to use? And hint, if you said no, you're very much in the minority. So accessibility isn't just about compliance, right? Which is a lot of what we hear. We hear about ADA compliance. We hear about the new Wacom compliance. We hear about all the things, but it's not about compliance. It's about ensuring that everyone can access the information, can access services, and can access opportunities. So just a few statistics to think about. 1 in 4 adults in the US lives with a disability. Accessibility improvements often benefit everyone, not just people with disabilities. And it also improves user experience, SEO, readability, and engagement across the board. The numbers speak for themselves, so accessibility is a great tool for everyone. Good design communicates clearly. Accessible design ensures everyone can receive that communication. So we're going to hop right into it. Why does it even matter, right? Why does accessibility matter? It creates equal access, right? So it supports individuals with visual, hearing, cognitive, motor, and neurological disabilities. It removes barriers to information and participation, and it aligns with organizational missions centered on service and inclusion. It improves the experience for everyone. Captions help people watching videos in noisy environments. High contrast text is easier for aging populations, and clear navigation benefits all users, right? So it's interesting how the accessibility requirements are really just inclusive requirements. They're for everybody. All right. It also reduces risk. Legal compliance, right? Like we have to be legally compliant. There are some requirements we're going to talk about in a little bit, but there's also a growing number of accessibility like related lawsuits involving websites and digital communications, and all of that is because they're not thinking about accessibility and keeping it front of mind. And making sure that you have thought about accessibility will protect organizations, not just from lawsuits, but it'll also protect your organizational trust for the public and your reputation. All right, so just an example of a poorly accessible website, which if you look at this, you would not know that this is for different restaurants, but it is. It is a very apparently fancy restaurant in London, or a series of restaurants in London, but honestly, it's one of the least accessible sites I have ever run into. And while it's interesting for maybe an art project, it is not interesting as a website for people to actually use. On the other hand, here is an accessibility focused website, right? So we'll talk about this later, but this says clear organization, clear navigation, fonts and colors that are accessible, all the wonderful things. All right, next up, accessibility for new projects. So, right, we can talk about the things that we've already done, but when we're talking about thinking about accessibility first and foremost and having that be top of mind, we want to talk about new projects. So, you want to build it into the process from the beginning, and it should be considered throughout each process section, right? So, planning, content development, design, development, that means digital, it's website, digital ads, those things, social media, and then testing, right? All right, and then you have your core accessibility standards. That's what I said we were going to talk about, right? So we have the ADA compliance. ADA has been around for a long time. The WCAG, or WCAG is what some people are calling it. They are new. These are requirements that will be set in stone in just under a year from now. They were supposed to be finalized and implemented for everybody that has like a public facing site, and public facing digital in March, but again, it got moved to March 2027. And then there's the POUR framework. So that is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And those you can expand on, right? So like perceivable is content can be seen or heard. Alt text is there for the images. Captions are there for videos. Operable means users can navigate using a keyboard control. Buttons and links are easy to interact with. Understandable, you're using clear, consistent language and navigation. You have predictable interactions, right? So if you click a button, it takes you somewhere. And then robust, which means it's compatible with assistive technologies. So screen readers, things like that. I'm going to be patient. All right, accessibility design checklist. So this is where we're going to talk about all the little pieces that go along with accessibility, especially in design. Color contrast. It must meet all color that you use on your screen or on anything that has to do with anything that you're going to have anyone look at that isn't just for personal use. Because if you can read it, great. But if you want everyone else to be able to read it, it has got to pass color contrast testing. You have to avoid relying solely on color to communicate the information as well. So keep in mind, and this is one of the things I love to tell people, 40% of people have some level of color blindness. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't see any color. It means that maybe their yellow cones don't see yellow quite the way they're supposed to, right? And so maybe the greens are always looking a little off and they don't even know it. A lot of people don't even know that they have any level of color blindness. So color contrast is imperative, because even if you think that there's high contrast, if you think that the colors you can see differently have enough contrast, if you put them into a color contrast checker and the hue is the same, it won't pass. So it can look like it'll pass, but it won't. And an example of that is this right here. So we have our passing contrast, which is pretty straightforward, right? You'd think that with the background being, with the text being white and the background being that darker purple, you wouldn't have any problems with passing, of course. But I know a lot of people that really love putting color on top of color. And so this teal, you'd think might be just fine on top of that purple, but you can see the contrast ratio is 2.75 to 1 over here where it's 7.5. And it's really nice because now they make it really easy. You can use a color contrast tester and it'll say it passes the AAA or the AA. You want it to pass both in order for it to be accessible and for it to pass accessibility regulations. And then you can see over here, it's like fail. So we want to avoid poor contrast. Next is typography. You want readable font sizes. Think about your audience. And that is in our previous presentation, we talked about font sizes and audience, right? If you're designing something or if you're building something for older eyes, think about making sure that the fonts are a little bit bigger. But even with accessibility, we want to make sure that the fonts are readable at a readable size, that they're clear font choices, and that you have adequate spacing, right? So of course, I've got some great little examples for you. Good type and poor type, right? We don't have enough space on the right. The poor type in orange, we have huge letters that take up too much space. We have a subhead that's too tight. It's in all caps, and then it's got this too many fonts. They're hard to read. And then the majority of the body copy is like way too small. Where the good type, it's very clearly laid out. There's enough breathing room between the type, and it's readable. All right, next up are images. Always, always, and that's why I put it in all caps. I try not to use all caps very often, but this is imperative. Provide meaningful alt text. And ideally, you want to stay about 125 characters. You can always go over if you really need to, but that's a great place to start and something to remember, 125 characters. And you want to avoid text embedded in images whenever possible. So I have a sample of that. This is an example of good text, good alt text, and bad alt text. Bad alt text just says picture of a car, which means that a screen reader would read to the person who cannot see this picture of a car. Where the good alt text is going to say red SUV driving on a winding mountain road. You could even expand on that. Red SUV driving on a winding mountain road on a beautiful blue sky day. This one is here. It's interesting. A lot of people don't necessarily understand that like live text versus embedded text. On your right, where it's not accessible, is an image that someone has created and then put somewhere. But text within an image is no longer text. It is now an image, which means that the only thing that the screen reader is going to read is the file name if you haven't given it alt text. Completely accessible text, though, would be written into the code, which means it's live text. It means you can copy and paste it somewhere, right? So that means that screen reader is going to read, hello world, I'm so excited to be here, instead of hello.jpg. We'd like to avoid that. All right, documents and PDFs. This is like a whole other ball game we could talk ad nauseum about. However, in our short time, I'm going to say, please, 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 when you're creating documents and you're working in and creating PDFs or you're working in documents, make sure that you have a proper heading structure. Make sure that you are tagging PDFs for reader order, and that you're using accessible tables. Tables are a great tool. I love a beautiful table, but a beautiful table that isn't that isn't accessible doesn't help, because then people are reading all over the place. Or people aren't reading all over the place, but the accessibility tools are reading all over the place. So we really need to make sure that, again, we're using proper heading structure, we're tagging reading order in the PDF, and we're using accessible tables. All of these things you can like Google and expand on. Again, I know I'm really scratching the surface on some of this stuff, but I want to make sure that it's something on your checklist to check out and make sure that you're looking into. Videos are a whole other ballgame as well, right? Make sure there are captions. If you can have a transcript whenever possible. There are some decent online transcripting services that are free. You can go in then and listen and edit just in case there's, if the transcript's a little off, but it is really, really valuable. All right, auditing existing projects for accessibility. This is tough, right? We have so much, basically the entire internet that needs to be accessible that is not. So start with a review of the project and ask yourself the following questions. Can text be read easily? Does it pass contrast testing? Can links be identified clearly? Are headings structured logically? Right? These are not necessarily questions you might have asked yourself when you built this other project, but there's questions you have to start with when you want to take something that might not be accessible and make it accessible. All right, common issues. Low contrast for text. Missing alt text. Again, if you have a picture, it needs to have alt text. Unlabeled buttons. Again, that's within a document. PDFs that aren't tagged, so there's no reader order, which means that however the text boxes were placed on there is how they're going to get read, unless there is specifically tagged reading order. And inaccessible forms, which means that they're not fillable. It could be a form, but maybe it's a JPEG of a form, which means it's not at all accessible because it's not live text at all. And it can't fill the form because it doesn't even look like an open field. All right, next part. This is the exciting part. Tools. There are so many good tools out there for accessibility. I'm just waiting. There we go. All right. These are just my favorites, but there are a ton online. So for contrast testing, the color contrast checker is a great option. It's exactly what you saw in my little do and don't earlier in the presentation, because this is literally the checker I use. So I go in and check all of my digital material for color contrast at that site. Website testing, now that tests your entire site. You can do just one page, you can do the entire site, right? The entire not wireframe, the menu. You can use evaluation tools. So that wave evaluation tool is something that we'll see. And then the Axe Dev tool is another option that you can use. Again, these are just my two favorites. There are a lot out there, and there are also back-end plugins to websites that will test and continually update for accessibility, things like Accessibility. But again, for your purposes and for like baseline, an evaluation tool is enough. And then PDF testing. So Adobe Acrobat has an accessibility checker, and I linked to their how-to. Sorry about that. Because that's a great tool to use. If you have Acrobat Pro, you can go in, do the accessibility checker, and then it'll actually give you like line by line. This is what has to happen. This is how it is not accessible. This is how you have to fix this document. So that's a great tool to utilize. All right, so because I love what I do, I went ahead and went to Bay Path University to the public health page to run it through Wave and see how it went with the accessibility checker. So to be totally honest, it's actually really pretty good. It's an 8.2 out of 10, which is very high. I know it might not sound great because like an 82 out of 100 is like, really? But in this day and age, there are so many sites that score a 1 or a 2 or a 2.5. So an 8.2 is pretty great. And really, you can see right here what they're saying, what this tool is saying the problems are. There are 3 errors. There's a missing label. You have linked images that are missing alt text, right? And then there are some contrast errors. So again, you can see sort of how this tool, you literally just like put in the URL up here, and then you ask it to review it. Now, one page is free. If you need to go further, that's a little bit different. But I wanted to show you what it looks like. All right, so accessibility as a design advantage. It really does better user experience. It increases audience reach. It creates a a feeling of more trust and credibility. It improves engagement. You have better search engine optimization and performance, and it's more inclusive, right? And it like literally is in the name, the term accessibility. So it really does strengthen design and is invaluable. For healthcare and nonprofits, the way that I like to think about it is that for healthcare organizations and nonprofits, especially, accessibility supports mission-driven communication by ensuring critical information reaches all audiences. So people who are using screen readers, I want them to receive the communication the same exact way that a sighted person would. All right, and please just remember, the good design is beautiful. Great design is usable. Accessible design ensures that no one is left out. So accessibility is about putting people first, which is great because I know that that's what public health students are all about. That's what we are all about, right? Is putting people first. Incorporating accessibility at the beginning of every project is going to make accessibility easier moving forward. Auditing older materials regularly, so finding those materials that are already online, that you're already using, making sure that those are accessible, and accessible design creates better experiences for everyone. All right. And questions? I was looking, I didn't know if there were any questions. Nope.
As a reminder, you can type them in, any of your questions, right into the question box that's provided with the GoToWebinar. I don't see any just yet, which is okay. If you do think of anything, as soon as we sign off, a week from now, whatever it might be, our contact information is on this page. So please do not hesitate and reach out to us. We'll be more than happy to assist. But I do want to say thank you, Elisa, for sharing your expertise and insight with us today. If you have additional questions, please use the contact information on the screen. We also want you to invite you to connect with us on social media if that is something that you're interested in. And as a reminder, recordings from this series, along with the other hot topics and healthcare presentations, are available on the Bay Path Doctor of Health Science webpage under the news section. And again, thank you all for joining us this evening. The recording and the presentation slides from tonight's session will be shared with you with all of those who have registered for this event. Thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.